The dojo door swung open in the middle of Bruce Lee's knife defense demonstration, and a man in a wrinkled gray suit walked straight onto the mat and bowed once before raising both fists at chest height. Listen closely, because what this stranger says in the next 30 seconds isn't a challenge to Bruce's speed or power. It's a challenge to every word Bruce has ever told his students about control. The Tuesday evening class had been running for 45 minutes when it happened. 12 students knelt along the mirrored wall in 2 neat rows, their white uniforms damp with sweat from the drills Bruce had been leading since 6 o'clock. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their pale glow across the polished hardwood floor. The smell of exertion hung in the air, clean sweat, the faint scent of the pine cleaner used to mop the mats that morning. Outside, the Oakland street was quiet, except for the occasional car passing by and the distant sound of someone's radio playing through an open window, a song that none of them could quite make out. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? Bruce had been demonstrating a disarm technique, how to redirect a knife thrust, control the wrist, and strip the weapon without cutting yourself or your attacker. It was advanced material, the kind of thing he only taught to students who had been with him for at least a year. He was holding a rubber training knife in his right hand, explaining the angle of deflection when the door opened and the stranger walked in. The man was maybe 35 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of compact muscle that comes from manual labor rather than gymnasium training. His hands were calloused, his knuckles scarred from work or fighting, or both. His suit was expensive but poorly maintained, wrinkled at the elbows, stained near the collar, as if he had been wearing it for days without changing. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the red of sleepless nights, and there was something in them that made several of the students shift uncomfortably in their kneeling positions. He didn't take off his shoes. That was the first violation. In Bruce Lee's dojo, everyone removed their shoes before stepping onto the training floor. It was a sign of respect for the space, for the practice, for the other students who would be placing their bare feet on the same surface. The stranger walked across the hardwood in his leather dress shoes, leaving faint scuff marks with each step, and stopped 6 feet in front of Bruce. The bow was perfunctory, a single dip of the head, barely more than a nod. And then the fists came up. "I want to see if you're real," the man said. His voice was hoarse, like he had been shouting recently, or crying. "I want to see if any of this is real." Notice the way Bruce responded to this moment. He didn't drop into a fighting stance. He didn't signal his senior students to intervene. He didn't raise his voice or show any sign of alarm. Instead, he slowly lowered the rubber knife to his side and looked at the stranger with an expression that was closer to curiosity than concern. "What's your name?" Bruce asked. The question seemed to catch the man off guard. He had clearly expected confrontation, not conversation. His fists stayed up, but some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "Why does that matter?" "Because I don't fight strangers. I talk to people, and people have names." The students were absolutely still. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the stranger's heavy breathing. Wait, because what happens in the next 2 minutes will reveal something about Bruce Lee that most people never see. Not the fighter, not the philosopher, but the teacher who understood that every conflict begins with a wound that hasn't healed. The stranger's fists lowered slightly, not all the way, but enough to suggest that violence wasn't his only option. "Michael?" he said finally. "My name is Michael." Bruce nodded, as if this information was exactly what he needed. "Michael, I'm Bruce. You already know that, or you wouldn't be here. So tell me what brought you to my door tonight." "I told you. I want to see if you're real." "That's not what you want." Bruce's voice was gentle but firm. "That's what you think you want. There's a difference. What you actually want is something else. Something that made you put on a suit and drive across town and walk into a room full of strangers with your fists raised. That's not curiosity. That's pain looking for a target. Stop for a second and picture this scene from above. Bruce Lee standing in the center of his dojo, a rubber knife dangling loosely from his right hand. A stranger in a wrinkled suit with his fists half raised. 12 students frozen along the wall, watching their teacher handle a situation that none of their training had prepared them for. And underneath it all, a question that had nothing to do with fighting. What does a man do when someone walks into his space and demands to be hurt? Michael's face changed. The aggression was still there, but something else was rising to the surface. Something raw and unguarded that he probably hadn't intended to show. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "That's true. But I know something about what you're feeling right now, because I've felt it too. The need to prove something, the need to know that you're strong enough to handle what life is throwing at you. The need to hit something, because hitting something is easier than sitting with the thing that's actually hurting you." Here's something you need to understand about Bruce Lee in this moment. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress his students or demonstrate some superior martial arts technique for handling confrontation. He was doing something much simpler and much harder. He was seeing another human being, clearly, without judgment, and responding to what he saw. The stranger named Michael was silent for a long moment. His fists had dropped almost to his sides now, though his hands were still clenched. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more uncertain. "My brother trained with someone like you. For 3 years, he said it changed his life. Said he learned discipline, focus, all that stuff. And then last month, he got into a fight outside a bar, and the other guy had a knife, and now my brother is dead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Bruce didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He let the silence stretch until it became a space that Michael could fill with whatever else he needed to say. "I keep thinking, what was the point? All that training, all that discipline, and he still died in a parking lot because some drunk guy had a knife, and my brother had principles. He could have run. He could have just walked away. But he tried to talk the guy down, tried to de-escalate, tried to do all the things he learned in his fancy martial arts school, and the guy stabbed him anyway." Listen to what Bruce does next, because this is the moment when the whole direction of the evening changed. Bruce set the rubber knife down on the floor. Then he walked toward Michael, not quickly, not aggressively, but with the calm deliberation of someone approaching a wounded animal. He stopped an arm's length away and spoke quietly enough that only Michael could hear him. "I'm sorry about your brother." 4 words, that was all. But the way Bruce said them, without defense, without explanation, without any attempt to justify or contextualize, created something that Michael hadn't experienced since his brother died. The simple acknowledgement of loss. Michael's face crumpled, not all at once, but in stages, like a wall coming down brick by brick. His shoulders shook, his breath caught in his chest, and then, standing in the middle of Bruce Lee's dojo in his wrinkled suit with his scuffed shoes, he began to cry. The students didn't know what to do. Some of them looked away, embarrassed by the intimacy of what they were witnessing. Others watched with expressions of shock or sympathy. One young woman in the front row had tears running down her own cheeks. Bruce didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, an arm's length from a stranger who was sobbing in his dojo, and he waited. He understood that grief has its own timeline, and that the worst thing you can do for someone in pain is rush them through it. Notice what's happening here. Bruce Lee, the martial artist, the philosopher, the man who could disable an attacker in seconds, was using none of his physical skills. Instead, he was demonstrating something that no training manual teaches: the courage to be present with another person's suffering without trying to fix it, fight it, or flee from it. After what felt like a very long time, Michael's breathing began to slow. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at Bruce with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and gratitude. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know why I came here. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. You came here because you needed somewhere to put your pain, and you thought that if you could prove that what your brother believed in was worthless, that it couldn't even hold up against one angry man in a suit, then maybe his death would make more sense. Maybe it would hurt less." Michael nodded slowly. "That sounds right. That sounds exactly right. The problem is that pain doesn't work that way. You can't fight your way out of grief. You can't prove that love was a mistake by destroying the things your brother loved. All you can do is feel it, and keep feeling it, until one day it becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you." The dojo was completely silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The mirrors reflected 12 students in white uniforms, watching their teacher do something that would never appear in any martial arts demonstration, holding space for a stranger's broken heart. Wait, because what happens next will change how Michael and everyone in that room understands what martial arts is really for. Bruce turned to face his students. "Class is going to take a different direction tonight. I want everyone to stay, but I want you to understand that what you're about to witness is as important as any technique I've ever taught you." He looked back at Michael. "Will you stay? I want to show you something." Michael hesitated, then nodded. He didn't know what else to do. His anger had burned out, leaving behind only exhaustion and the raw vulnerability of a man who had just cried in front of strangers. Bruce walked to the edge of the mat and retrieved the rubber knife he had set down earlier. Then he turned to his senior student, a man named James, who had been training with Bruce for 4 years. "James, come here. I want to demonstrate something." James rose from his kneeling position and walked to the center of the mat, his bare feet silent on the polished wood. He was tall, athletic, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years refining his skills under Bruce's demanding instruction. He had competed in tournaments, trained through injuries, and earned his place as the most senior student in the room. He took his position opposite Bruce and waited, his breathing slow and controlled. "The technique I was teaching before we were interrupted is called the redirect," Bruce said, his voice now carrying to everyone in the room. "It's designed to neutralize a knife attack without injuring the attacker. Watch carefully. Here's what you need to understand about what Bruce was about to do. He wasn't just demonstrating a technique. He was answering Michael's question. The real question. The one underneath all the anger and grief. Does any of this matter? Can discipline and training and philosophy actually make a difference in a world where people die in parking lots for no reason?" Bruce handed the rubber knife to James. "Attack me." Full speed, James lunged forward, the blade thrusting toward Bruce's midsection. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Bruce's left hand swept outward, deflecting the thrust to the side. His right hand closed around James's wrist. A slight rotation, a shift of weight, and suddenly James was off balance, the knife tumbling from his grip as Bruce guided him into a controlled fall. James hit the mat with a soft thump. The knife landed 3 feet away. Bruce released his grip and offered his hand to help James back to his feet. "That's the technique," Bruce said, "but that's not the lesson." He turned to face Michael directly. "Your brother learned something like this. Maybe this exact move, maybe something similar, and you're wondering why it didn't save him. Why all his training didn't stop a drunk man with a knife in a parking lot." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "The answer is that martial arts isn't about winning fights. It never has been. The techniques exist. Yes, they work, but their purpose isn't to make you dangerous. Their purpose is to make you calm, to give you options other than panic, to create space between stimulus and response, so that you can choose your actions instead of just reacting." Stop here and let that sink in, because this is the core of everything Bruce Lee believed about his art. Your brother tried to de-escalate. You said that yourself. He tried to talk the other man down. He did exactly what his training taught him to do, not to fight, but to find another way. And it didn't work. The other man chose violence anyway. That's not a failure of your brother's training. That's a tragedy of human nature. We can't control what other people do. We can only control ourselves. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Then what's the point? If it doesn't protect you, what's the point? The point is that your brother died as the person he chose to be. He died trying to prevent violence, not cause it. He died with his principles intact. And I know that doesn't make it hurt less. Nothing makes it hurt less, but it means something. It means he didn't become the thing he was fighting against. The silence in the dojo was complete. Not uncomfortable, but full weighted with meaning, heavy with the kind of truth that changes how people see the world. Bruce walked over to where the rubber knife lay on the mat and picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. This is a tool, he said. In the right hands, it can be used for defense. In the wrong hands, it can be used for destruction. The same is true of everything I teach here. The techniques, the discipline, the philosophy, they don't make you good or bad. They make you more capable of being whatever you already are. He looked at Michael. Your brother was a good man who learned to be more capable, and he used that capability to try to help someone else, even when it cost him everything. That's not a failure. That's the whole point. Listen to what Michael says next, because it's the moment when something shifted inside him, not completely, not permanently, but enough. I've been so angry since it happened. I've been angry at the guy who did it, angry at the cops who couldn't find him, angry at my brother for not running away. I came here tonight because I wanted to be angry at you too, at all of this. He gestured vaguely at the dojo, the students, the mirrors reflecting their silent faces. I wanted there to be someone left to blame. There's no one left to blame, Bruce said quietly. There's only grief, and grief is just love with nowhere to go. Michael closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had changed in his expression. The rage was gone, replaced by something softer and more uncertain, the beginning of acceptance, or at least the willingness to consider it. What do I do now? He asked. I don't know what to do with any of this. Bruce considered the question for a long moment. Then he said something that none of his students expected. Take off your shoes. Michael blinked. What? Take off your shoes. If you're going to stand on my mat, you do it with bare feet, like everyone else. That's the rule. Notice what Bruce was doing. He wasn't offering therapy or philosophy or martial arts training. He was offering something simpler, a concrete action, a small ritual, a way back into the world of normal human behavior after the chaos of grief. Michael looked down at his scuffed leather shoes, then at the students kneeling along the wall, then at Bruce. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face. Okay, he said. Okay. He bent down and unlaced his shoes, setting them neatly at the edge of the mat. When he straightened up in his socked feet, he looked somehow smaller, more human, more like a person, and less like a weapon looking for a target. Now what? He asked. Now you sit down and watch. That's all. You don't have to participate. You don't have to understand. You just have to be here, in this room, with these people, and let yourself feel whatever you feel without trying to fight it. Michael nodded and walked to an open space along the wall. He sat down cross-legged, his back against the mirror, his wrinkled suit incongruous among the white uniforms surrounding him. He looked exhausted, but the desperate energy that had driven him through the door was gone. Bruce turned back to his students. We're going to continue the class. But before we do, I want to say something about what just happened, because it's more important than any technique I could teach you tonight. The students straightened. giving him their full attention. A man walked into this dojo with violence in his heart. He raised his fists. He was ready to fight. And what did we do? We didn't fight back. We didn't call the police. We didn't throw him out. We listened. We made space. We met his anger with presence instead of force. He paused, letting the words settle. That's the highest form of martial arts. Not the kicks, not the punches, not the throws or locks or strikes. The highest form is the ability to transform conflict into connection, to see the humanity in someone who's trying to hurt you and respond to that humanity instead of to the threat. Wait, because what Bruce says next is the core principle that guided everything he taught. This doesn't mean you should never defend yourself. It doesn't mean you should let people hurt you. Sometimes physical force is necessary. Sometimes there's no other option. But those situations are rarer than most martial artists want to admit. Most of the time, the real danger isn't the fist coming at your face. It's the anger in your own heart that makes you want to hit back. He picked up the rubber knife again and held it up for everyone to see. I can teach you to disarm an attacker. I can teach you to redirect force, to use an opponent's momentum against them, to end a fight in seconds. But none of that matters if you don't first learn to disarm yourself, to redirect your own anger, to use your own momentum toward healing instead of harm. The class continued for another hour. Bruce led them through the knife defense drill, adjusting grips and correcting stances, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the room. There was a seriousness to the practice that hadn't been there before, a sense that they were learning something that extended far beyond technique. Michael sat against the wall and watched. He didn't participate, didn't speak, didn't move, except to wipe his eyes occasionally when the grief rose up again. But he stayed. He bore witness. When the class ended, the students bowed and began gathering their things. Several of them glanced at Michael as they filed out, offering small nods of acknowledgement. One young man stopped in front of him and extended his hand. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said. "He sounds like he was a good person." Michael shook the hand. "He was." "Thank you." Bruce waited until the last student had left, then walked over to where Michael was putting his shoes back on. "How do you feel?" "I don't know. Empty, maybe. But a different kind of empty than before. Like something that was stuck inside me got loose. That's grief moving through you instead of getting stuck. It's a good sign, even if it doesn't feel good." Michael finished tying his shoes and stood up. He looked around the dojo at the mirrors, the wooden floor, the fluorescent lights that had witnessed his breakdown and his beginning recovery. "I don't know if I'll ever understand why my brother died," he said. "I don't know if there's an answer to that question that would actually help." "There probably isn't," Bruce agreed. "Some things don't have answers. They only have responses. The question isn't why it happened. The question is what you do with yourself now that it has." Michael nodded slowly. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door and looked back. "Thank you for not fighting me, for not giving me what I thought I wanted. What you wanted was to feel something other than grief. Fighting would have just given you more pain to carry. I hope what happened instead gave you something lighter." Michael didn't respond. He just nodded once more and walked out into the Oakland night, leaving Bruce Lee alone in his dojo with the echo of what had just happened. If you followed this story to this point, you understand that what happened that Tuesday evening wasn't really about martial arts. It was about the fundamental choice that every person faces in every moment of conflict. Do I meet force with force, or do I try something else? Bruce Lee built his reputation on being one of the most formidable fighters in the world, but his legacy isn't about the fights he won. It's about the fights he chose not to have, the moments when he used his presence instead of his power, the times when he taught his students that the highest victory is the one that doesn't require violence. The following week, something unexpected happened. Michael came back. He didn't come to fight. He didn't come with his fists raised. He came wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, with a pair of clean white socks in his pocket, and he asked Bruce if he could watch another class. "You can do more than watch," Bruce said. "You can train, if you want to." "I don't know if I want to. I don't know what I want anymore." "That's fine. Training isn't about knowing what you want, it's about discovering what you need." Michael started coming to Tuesday evening classes. He was awkward at first, uncomfortable in his body, unsure of the movements that came naturally to students who had trained for months. His grief had stiffened him, but he kept showing up, week after week, through rain and heat and his own doubt. He kept coming through that door, and taking off his shoes, and learning to move in ways that his grief-stiffened body had forgotten how to move. 6 months later, he was wearing a white uniform like everyone else. A year after that, he was helping new students learn the basic stances. He never became a great fighter. That wasn't the point. But he became something more valuable, a person who could sit with his pain without being destroyed by it. If you want to hear about another moment when Bruce Lee faced a test he didn't expect, a day on a film set when a stunt went wrong, and he had to choose between his career and his conscience, tell me in the comments. And while you're there, let me know what's the hardest fight you've ever chosen not to have. Some victories don't look like victories. They look like a man in a wrinkled suit crying on a dojo floor. They look like a teacher putting down a training knife and asking a stranger's name. They look like the decision to meet anger with presence, to answer violence with witness, to transform conflict into connection. That's the real martial art. Not what you do with your fists, what you do with your heart. Bruce Lee understood that. He proved it on a Tuesday evening in Oakland, when a man walked into his dojo looking for a fight and found something better. He proved it in the patience he showed, the questions he asked, the space he created for grief to move through instead of getting stuck. And somewhere, in dojos and training halls around the world, his students still teach what he taught them, that the highest form of strength is the strength to remain human when everything in you wants to become a weapon. That's the legacy, not the kicks, not the speed, not the legend. The simple, profound truth that every person you meet is carrying something you cannot see, and the bravest thing you can do is meet them there.